Welcome everyone to our Future of School webinar, where we're talking about moving from the margins. We're excited to have a series where we're going to be focusing on elevating the voices of educators, students, and then the collective school voice. It's really important as we're moving into a school year where, as our panelists were sharing at the beginning, that some schools haven't decided what they're doing this fall. Some schools have. Some districts made a decision and then they changed. Some districts made a decision and they might change tomorrow. So we are living in the reinvention and reimagining of our K-12 education system together. And when we have meeting of the minds like these, where we can hear from educators who all in some way have been an early adopter in their own right to technology, innovation, or new ways of teaching and learning, there's so much that we can glean. So thank you to all of our panelists for being here. We're really excited. And if you're just joining us, go ahead and put in the chat who you are, where you're from, and you can start to put questions in the Q&A. I do want to give a brief overview of our panelists, and then I promise you that will be, other than facilitating, that'll be the extent of me talking, because it's easy as the leader at Future of School for me to want to share a lot, but you'll learn way more from our panelists who are here today than you will from me. So in order of show, we have Christine Austin. She's assistant principal at Gwinnett Online Campus in Gwinnett County, Georgia. And we were chatting at the beginning that Georgia's in the news a lot right now for different shifts and changes in their decisions for K-12 schools. So thank you for weathering the storm, Christine. And what she does is she leads a full-time online program within her county. So they've been very much early adopters. And she's been there since their inception, which was almost 10 years ago. She's been an educator for 17 years, has held a variety of capacities. And as we heard, she is going to be having her own children taking advantage of different modes of learning this fall. And so she'll be balancing that parent teacher role and administrator as well, I should say. Nicole Biscotti, who has one of my favorite last names ever, and this is coming from someone whose last name is Valentine. She is a very strong, fervent supporter that everybody should have access to a quality education, regardless of any barriers that stand in their way. She's a published author, she's a teacher, she's a leader, she is definitely a leader on social media, on Twitter, and she's a super connector. So we'll make all of their bios available, but I like to highlight the things that have touched me about them versus their resumes. But again, we'll have those made available for you. Teresa Bruce joins us from Baltimore, Maryland, and Maryland's been in the news as well for some recent decisions having been made around private schools being mandated to do remote instruction this fall. But again, that's what I saw the last time I watched the news. It could have changed since then. Teresa has been at KIPP Academy for many years, and she has a strong passion for policy. How can we use policy to increase access and equity? And what an amazing time for her to be exploring the space, since the policy levers have been turned off right now, and we have a really interesting, an interesting blank slate to redesign opportunities for kids. Alejandro de la Peña is a special education teacher, and he's also first-generation college grad with a master's and a bachelor's in special education. He has an amazing story of why he wanted to be a teacher. It's one that touched all of us at our last webinar. So if we have the chance to have you share that again today, Alejandro, we would love that. He really works hard to engage students, inspire students, and also prove that a disability never defines a student, that if we can reconceptualize it as a gift, as a strength that a student has that they overcome, that they will reconceptualize what's possible for them. And last but not least, Tracy Kelly. He's been teaching, he has 10 years experience teaching special education in California. He's currently working on his doctoral degree in his spare time. So we have lifelong learners among us as well. He's worked at the secondary and post-secondary levels, and he has edited 6 books, and he's starting to write his dissertation, which is pretty much writing a book right now. So lots of experience writing. So without further ado, again, if you're just joining us, please share in the chat who you are, where you live, and then you can put in the Q&A questions that you're coming to us with. I'm gonna pull up a few slides for us just to reference. Future of School published a national pulse survey of teachers in June. We worked with a research firm to survey them right after the school year ended. And there's a lot of great information in there that we can use to reference and reinforce what our panelists say today. So as I pull that up, we would love to hear from our panelists as a starting point, and we'll go from left to right, starting with you, Tracy. What was
Sorry, I had to look at my hands to figure out left from right.
My left to right. You know, the questions that we had started to field from people who were interested in attending was about two main questions, but feel free to share whatever speaks to you right now. One is, what was your first entry point with technology in your classroom or in your school, even before COVID? And how would you characterize, how would you explain, or how do you understand the shift that's happened in our K-12 education system because of the pandemic, from your experiences as an educator? So again, you know, what was your first entry point, and what was that like for you? And then your perception of where we are today.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I'm gonna have to work my way into the shift. That's a bigger point. My entry point was year one. I happened to, you know, when somebody offers you a contract, you pretty much go there. And I would start with a smart board. A smart board to be able to teach or to use as a tool to help me teach in the classroom was different for me. And my first one wasn't even a touch screen smart board. It was just basically a big projector. And since then I've gone, oh, where haven't I gone? Well, when I went back to teach at the university, we didn't even have smart boards. We still had overhead projectors with the man, what do they call it? I've forgotten. Transparencies. I mean, I'm teaching at the university, you know, 5 or 6 years into my teaching career for K-12, and we're still teaching like it was 1954 or whatever year you want to go to. It was ridiculous. But now we're using Promethean boards that have multiple displays. I mean, obviously going into virtual, we have whatever computer screen, your phone, your Apple Watch. I don't know, does an Apple Watch work to do a Zoom? I don't know, but I'm sure it does. So, I mean, you know, where can't we go virtually with our technology? So yeah, we're everywhere. So shift to K-12. You know, I heard in Google Meet earlier today that somebody thinks that we as face-to-face teachers will become obsolete. It irritated me. I don't think it's true. I mean, yeah, somebody's going to experiment with an algorithm. Sorry, somebody pronounce that word the right way for me.
It's one of the few, the algorithm, it's one of the few hard ones that I'm good at. But if you ask me to write an algorithm, I'm coming to you, because that I can't.
Thank you, Amy, for the save. I appreciate that, for the assist. But yeah, so I don't think the face-to-face or even virtual with the craft of teaching is ever going to go away. I think there are a ton of tools to supplement and help us be more efficient to reach a wider audience. But I don't think it's going away as the face-to-face. So we're doing it different. But if we call ourselves lifelong learners, and if we want to help others become those lifelong learners, we need to stay current with all of the different ways we can access people. So I think that's the biggest shift for me is there's not one right way. There's not only 10 ways to do it. There are many different ways as there are learners to get us there. So I think that's my short and sweet answers to those points, Amy.
Well, that was fantastic. And I am going to say, I'm really glad we're going to have the transcription of this, because my hand already hurts from writing down the quotes from you and some thoughtful questions. So thank you very much. Christine.
Thank you. So as far as my first entry point into technology, like Tracy, I guess I probably would say right when I first, went into teaching. I remember I was teaching at the time, I was teaching a writing class, and I had like 32 kids in there, and they were struggling writers, and they were identified to be in my class because, in a nutshell, they hated writing. And I had, of the 32, probably 25 of them were boys, and they were in 8th grade. So a bunch of 8th grade boys who didn't like to write. So I had my work cut out for me. And I had discovered InterWrite boards, which were basically like the little handheld Mobies that you could write on. And I wrote a grant and I got 8 of those, as well as a teacher held one. And so every day I would group my kids into small groups around these boards, and we would do these writing activities where, like, I would give them a writing prompt and I would let them look on the boards and they would edit and revise, and then they would be able to share their writing and put it up on the board. And I put it up like Brady Bunch style quadrants on the screen so they could see each other's work, and they could, you know, really have this very interactive experience with writing and see that it wasn't just this arduous process. And I was really able to take the technology and help my kids learn and see that it could be fun and it could be exciting and they could do it. And it was empowering for me as their teacher, because I was able to take something that I love and use technology to empower my students. So what I ended up doing was, I was like this little saleswoman for these boards, and I would go around to all my colleagues and be like, you have to use these boards, you have to use them. And I just continually kept hearing, I don't have time to learn new technology, I don't have time to do this, I've got to do my curriculum. So every single day during my planning period, I would go to other teachers' classrooms. So I would go before school and we'd sit down and I'd say, what lesson is it you want to learn? And so let's say it was a science lesson and I didn't know anything about science, and I'd have them teach me the science lesson, and then I would plan an activity using the boards. Then during my planning, I would go and I would teach their lesson for them using the boards to model, so then they could go ahead and redeliver it, because I was just so passionate about it and I really wanted other teachers to be able to use it. And I knew that they weren't going to do it unless they could actually see their students using that technology, and they could see me showing them firsthand, this is how you do it. It's not hard, you can do it. Look, just write a grant and you can get it. And so it was really exciting for me, and it was very early in my career, and it got my wheels turning and really got me excited about how I can use resources that are out there and that are available and really help. Really the greater mission that I had at that point was to help my kids love writing. So that I would say is in a nutshell how I would say my entry point into technology in my classroom was. As far as, and then, you know, fast forward a few years later, I was asked to come over to Gwinnett Online campus to help start up their middle school program, which was, I mean, truly like a dream come true. I got to take all those little ideas and turn them into a school, which is amazing. As far as how I would characterize the major shift, you know, I really think a shift is a great word to use to describe it, because teachers have just gone from one extreme to the other, and it's been really powerful to me and impressive the way the teachers have just come together to help each other and to learn new skills. A great example is, I believe on the last webinar, I shared a story about my son's science teacher who had called me, and she was really frustrated because she had spent all of this time working on this website that she had created, and it made perfect sense to her, and the kids were really struggling with it. And she called me because she was so frustrated, and I was trying to help her understand that just because it made sense in her head didn't mean it made sense to all of the other kids, and they have 6 teachers, and we have to really think through all of this. So that was back in March, and she had my oldest child in March. Well, my boys are 13 months apart, so my second child is going to have her this year. And just 2 days ago, I actually texted her because she called me earlier this week and said, I want some tips. I want to create some kind of video or strategy or something to help my kids with what do they need to know when they're doing an online session. Like, is there, you know, some kind of etiquette they should know? Is there, you know, should their cameras be on or off? Should I let them have access to the mics, to the chat box? And we were talking through all kinds of stuff. And so just kind of haphazardly, I came across this really awesome resource that another teacher had created that pretty much addressed everything she had been talking about with me. So I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to her in a text, and I said, hey, just saw this. It made me think of our discussion, wanted to send it to you. Instantaneously, she responded with a picture of her computer screen where she was working at that very moment, where she had pretty much created that exact same thing. And it was so awesome to me because 6 months ago, she was calling me in tears because she was so frustrated and didn't know where to begin, and she was overwhelmed. And just to see the growth, and for her to recognize the growth even within herself and the community that's come together, it's just been very powerful to me. And then the other thing that I wanted to comment on is Tracy mentioned that, you know, there's this kind of looming threat of face-to-face teachers are becoming obsolete. And I think that is something that we hear a lot of, and it's a discussion that we have a lot here at GOC. One of the projects that we work on is personalized learning, and we have that discussion a lot about, you know, these algorithms come up and there's all this, you know, if-then statements, and we're trying to really use computers to push out programming to students. And the one thing that I believe will never let that happen is the teacher is always the analytical engine. You cannot take that teacher away, because the teacher is the one that's going to be able to say, I know this student, and that score is not indicative of who that student is. And I do think in this time and during this shift, that is becoming even more apparent, because that student who might be really quiet in the classroom face to face, they're coming out of their shell and they're reaching out and they're advocating for themselves and really allowing the teachers to really get to know them. And the teachers are recognizing that, and they're seeing a new side of themselves as educators, and they're seeing a new side of their students. So that was kind of a long-winded answer.
No, I think it's great. And one of the things that's so powerful when we come together in these webinars is the positivity. It's not a sense of we have all the answers, or, you know, here's the playbook, because certainly that doesn't exist. But there's such a sense of positivity. And when you leverage that against a lot of what's out there right now, in particular on social media, there's a lot of negativity. And I personally believe it's because we as a society don't elevate the voices of teachers and educators to be heard, and students too. But in this case, you know, teachers supporting teachers goes leaps and bounds. That can take a one-day PD and times it by 100 in terms of intensity and value. So,
Absolutely.
All right, Alejandro.
Hi. So for me, I think my entry point in technology as a teacher was trying to get over the stigma that cutting edge technology doesn't belong in SPED. So like my first year as a special education teacher, I had severely disabled students. And I was doing a grant, a Donors Choose grant, and I was trying to get a 3D printer. And I got so much pushback from it. They're like, what are they gonna do with a 3D printer? But, you know, I pushed ahead and we actually did get it. And they learned to do it. They learned how to print things. They learned how to download things, how to modify things. They learned how to do it. The same thing with drones, with everything that I thought that would even be challenging for me. It's like, you know what? I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to slowly, step by step, introduce it to them, and then we'll take it from there. But like even this year, kind of mentioning, going on what you're saying on teachers being replaced. So I kind of brought in what a lot of people think might replace teachers. Is I have this Temi robot. It's an artificial intelligence. It's kind of like a Roomba meets Siri kind of thing. And it's tall. It's like about 3.5 feet tall. And it just roams around the classroom, and you can talk to it, and you can ask questions, and it'll give you answers from the internet and things like that. But as much artificial intelligence as it doesn't have any emotional intelligence. It just gives you like the cut dry answer, and that's it. So yeah, there's got to be the personal touch that teachers have before that. And I think the shift right now, for me at least, is always looking to the future. It's always kind of like, people think of the future as like really, really far away, many years into the future. It's not here yet, but I think you got to dip your toes in as much as you can now, challenge yourself, push yourself to try new things. Like this year, we were trying to do some blockchain. We were trying to do a little bit more advanced things, and same thing with my special ed students. Was that as much as I push them and as much as they really give it their all, there's always a lot of people that doubt them. And I think it's the same with teachers. I think there's a misconception about that kind of teachers just don't push the envelope enough. But what I'm seeing a lot is there's a lot of sharing. The shift, we're using technology not just for the sake of using technology, but we're using it to communicate. For example, like on TikTok. I know TikTok gets a bad rap often, but TikTok, I found so many teachers that are sharing Bitmoji classrooms. They're sharing different ideas, a bunch of different resources, a lot of different websites that are going to be useful for when we go back to the classroom. And those are just things that just don't make the news. All you hear about TikTok is like, oh, it's going to get banned because from China. Oh, they're stealing all your information. But teachers will use anything that we can get our hands on to communicate with each other and improve the education for our students. That's what I think right now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. And I did put a resource in that from a fellow nonprofit that really addresses the misperception that computers or automation is going to replace teachers. So it's an interesting article to share with colleagues. And to me, it's a fundamental, simple premise for me. It's the relationship between the teacher and the student. That's at the core. That's what it is, right? It's the connection. It's the relationship that, however intuitive a robot or AI gets, it can't replace that. To your point, Alejandro, about emotional intelligence, that's the piece it doesn't have. And that the place of technology is to make teachers' jobs easier and more efficient so that they can focus on the relationship building with their students. All right, Teresa, looking forward to hearing from you.
Awesome sauce. So, hey everyone. My intro to tech it's funny that I'm even talking about this because the first 3 years of my teaching career, I had like basic black chalkboards. We were in a school district at the time that had those old Lenovo black computers. I don't know if anybody remembers those or if your district had them, on laptop carts that you had to split with your entire team. So initially, like, that was my intro to tech. And I was like, well, this is what tech is in schools. I don't want any part of it because they were beat up, they were old, they were slow. You always had to figure out who was going to get the card on which day. It wasn't reliable. Not to mention the building wasn't wired properly for consistent Wi-Fi. So it was just a headache. And so that was like my first 3 years. And I was like, I'm the copy machine is about to be my best friend. And then I switched schools within my district in 2014. In the year that I came into the social studies department, there was a fellow colleague, social studies teacher, who was like tech savvy. And he had this great idea that our entire department was going to operate on Chromebooks and that we were going to launch Google Classroom. And that is where everything was going to be. And just to be clear, like, the way that Google Classroom exists now was not the way it existed in 2014. Nor was it like trendy and many people weren't doing it. So he had this idea and I was just like, PTSD from my first placement. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to deal with tech. But I didn't really have a choice, right? Because that's what my department was doing. And so it became a steep learning curve very quickly. So, I had like 1 week training on what Google Classroom was, and then boom, I was in there every day posting, and it was a lot of trial and error. I'll be very honest, it was very difficult for me at first because there's just like some tips and tricks you gotta learn. But my young people, my scholars, were really helpful in that learning experience because young people catch on real fast. And so they were able to help me navigate and figure it out. And then down the rabbit hole I went, because once I started seeing the power in the ways that we can leverage technology for individualized mastery-based learning, I was hooked. And once I figured out how technology can also be used in the social emotional learning field, I was hooked. And so here I am many years later, and I'm like the de facto like instructional tech person in my school. And I love tech. And so for anybody out there watching this on live or in the replay, just know that take a chance. It's gonna be awesome. You're gonna struggle. Heck, sometimes you're gonna fail, but it's totally worth it when you figure out the instructional technology that works for you and your scholars. That being said, when I think about the mind shift that the pandemic has caused, it's created an entire mindset shift around technology and around a sense of urgency as it relates to equity in technology. Amy said in the beginning, like, equity is one of my biggest things. It is, and you're going to hear me talk about it a lot. But one thing the pandemic has done has laid it all bare. Because as teachers who are in schools, we know about inequities in funding sources, between school buildings, between school districts. We understand all those things. We talk about it all the time, right? But I felt that it was like the outside. It were people who are not educators or who maybe had not taught for years who had forgotten about it or didn't know. And so the pandemic made it so that you couldn't ignore it. So now all of a sudden it's like, okay, we need to go to remote learning. Oh no, certain people don't have certain things. And the pandemic created this mindset shift also around one, technology, like I've already mentioned, but two, about whose responsibility it was and the impact on student outcomes. So very quickly, because I'm getting long-winded, you can tell I'm passionate about this, but very quickly, when we think about what the mantra is about teachers or why the United States is not doing well on standardized tests and all those things, it's usually placed at the feet of schools and more importantly at the feet of teachers, right? Like it must be the teacher's fault. They must not care enough. You know, there's all these negative mantras. With the pandemic, all of a sudden it became like, wait, this is a bigger societal issue, right? Like this is an equity issue. And so I'm very excited that that is a conversation that we are having. And that instructional technology is being brought to the forefront for academic engagement and not just to do it.
That's awesome. Fantastic. You hit on a lot of great points. And right before we turn it over to Nicole, I do want to just share with our attendees and everyone who's watching the recording, Teresa hit on everyone has hit on great points. And some of the ones that Teresa hit on, we presented in our Pulse survey overview, which was some important phraseology that what we saw this spring was crisis schooling. It wasn't online education. We could say kids were learning online and teachers were teaching online, but that's very different than online education, what Christine's been doing since 2011 at Gwinnett Online. It's different. And so it's left parents and educators frustrated, like, okay, I know technology can be beneficial. I know it can be helpful, but oh my gosh, like it doesn't work. Well, that was just an emergency response to a very difficult situation that we were having socially. But to Teresa's point, it opened us up. It opened up the education system for us to see what's possible. And then the second phraseology that we like to reference is technology versus tech-enabled instruction. Technology is a tool. Technology isn't an answer. It's not the solution. It's a tool that can be used to bring to scale the much needed change in terms of increasing access, increasing equity, increasing academic opportunity for kids. So there's a lot of confusion right now because online teaching and learning, though it's not new to America, it's new to most Americans because most kids in our country go to school at their local brick and mortar, in their local brick and mortar district. That's the reality. The reality is that's the majority. So no one's saying that I've ever heard or that I know is saying that, okay, how can we automate it? Or let's grow the online schools, or let's push for blended schools, or it's really, how can we work together to transform the one size fits all of the K-12 system to bring it up to date with what we need. So I'll get off my soapbox and I'll turn it over to you, Nicole. I'm excited to hear your perspective on your entry point to technology. I'm not sure that I know that.
So My entry point to technology was when I started teaching. I'm really I put a lot of emphasis on reaching the students where they're at, meeting them where they're at. And in thinking about my students as I approached the classroom, I realized that we were very different. I've seen a huge growth in technology. I was a kid and you called somebody and they weren't home, that was it, you know? Or if somebody was on the phone, that was it, because there was no call waiting. So, you know, I'm dealing with kids that really grew up under different circumstances than what I did. You know, they did not grow up waiting for the Saturday morning cartoons. I did. They were not taught to be quiet and sit still and wait, you know, while mommy was in an appointment. At a restaurant, they were not taught to sit quietly while the family conversed, or better yet, I was encouraged not even to speak while the adults were speaking at the table. They are given a, what do you call those things, iPad, and they drive their own content. They're not passive observers. So in looking at that, and then looking at like what Teresa was mentioning about fighting over the laptop, collaborating with the laptop, you know, with the whole department and all that, and cards, I started to realize that my students already use technology all the time, and in fact, most of them had it in their pockets. So what I did is I just basically had them take out their phones, which most of them were in their laps anyways, right? And I teach high school. And I basically, and you know, there's always a few kids that don't have a phone, but that's cool because other kids share with them and they're happy to do all that. And pretty much what their access to technology meant to me and their comfort level with driving their content meant to me was student choice. So that was really one of the founding principles of my teaching from day one, because I realized, you know, just was pretty obvious that they did not need me to spout information. They really needed the soft skills, learning the critical thinking, the innovation, taking risks, resilience. And back to the why we can't be replaced by robots, I think that on top of what you were saying, Amy, about the relationship, there's also this major piece about the fact that we're developing critical thinkers and innovators. So we're really developing our learners. You know, I teach Spanish. Anybody can get Rosetta Stone, right? Like anybody can go on Duolingo. They don't really need information from me. They need me to help them develop critical thinking and learn, you know, to make comparisons between their cultures and others, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, I have to be honest, I don't use a lot of the technologies that a lot of other teachers use. I'm always pretty skeptical, like, okay, what is this new thing really going to teach my kids? Like, is this really worth an investment of our time? I usually tend more towards leveraging the technology that they're using. And sometimes they even share technology with me, like, hey, can we please do Kahoot more? And then I'll go and learn Kahoot. And now we're using Kahoot, or, you know, that was a few years ago. But basically, like, I really try to let them drive the technology decisions in the classroom to a large extent. I'm excited that I'm at a district now that has Canvas. So I think that's going to be a great tool for overall intervention. Yeah, I'm really loving Canvas so far, I have to say. And in terms of how this pandemic is shifting education, I would almost say, like, geez, it took a pandemic, you know, like it really took a pandemic to shake things up. And I see a lot of opportunities here. It's a very awkward thing to say because people are suffering. But at the same time, in terms of education, we have so much opportunity. Our kids are already using technology. They are always going to use technology. We're finally getting on board. And the other benefit I see to this situation is that we now have real collaboration with parents. I have a platform with Melissa Sidebotham that I do that's supposed to really bring parents and educators together, because I think there's a lack of that. I really don't like parent-teacher conferences. I don't like 9 o'clock coffee with the principal, I'm sorry. But I think that that's limiting to a lot of families, and those are very structured conversations. So I think that it was pretty cool to call my families in March and say, hey, how are you guys doing? You know, now it's not Johnny's failing, it's how are you doing? And it was no longer I'm the teacher, they're the parent. You know, everybody took their hats off, or what their roles are, you know, out the window, and we're all just people trying to make it through a pandemic. So I'm really hoping that going forward and going into the school year, we can strengthen those actual authentic connections with parents to get to the point of collaboration.
Amazing. Thank you. so much. And I like how you highlighted that you empower your students to have a voice and to teach you, okay, well, what can we do with this technology? There's an app maker, or there's this way we can use this tool that's relevant for the, content area. I think that's great. All right, so we are going to shift over to some questions that are coming in. And the first one is around balancing remote and hybrid learning. We are starting a school at school, they're starting as remote, but they're going to transfer to hybrid when health conditions improve, whenever that will be. How do you handle students who stay remote and those who will attend school in the hybrid setup? And I imagine that this question really is around managing the two different learning environments. And George, you can feel free to clarify if you have an extension to that. So handling learners who came from one environment, but now they're splitting off into full-time at home and then the hybrid models.
I'll take that one if you want. So that's a question that we get pretty regularly here. And one of the advices that we're giving to teachers in that situation is really to manage your face-to-face kids in the hybrid setting. So if that makes sense, let me try to explain it. I guess because you never know, like right in March, like we were here face-to-face and then tomorrow we weren't, right? And so that was part of the challenge, was our teachers didn't really have any lead time. Our students didn't have any lead time. There wasn't that preparation. So instead, if we can shift our thinking to say, every day, whether my kids are at home learning or whether they're here face-to-face learning, I'm going to make sure they're having a really great, high-quality digital experience. Then regardless of where they're at, they're going to have that really rich instruction. So let's say you're using Google Classroom. When you're designing your lessons on Google Classroom, your students, even when they're with you face-to-face, they can still partake in that online experience. Now you can choose to do it in a centers-based instruction where maybe you've got different centers doing different parts of that component. You could even pull it up and do it whole group with your class, and you can have more of a teacher-led instructional approach to it, but still going off of that Google Classroom design. So either way you set it up, your kids at home and your kids that are with you in the building are still going to be receiving the same instructional design that you've created for them. So then if tomorrow, all of a sudden, they're all digital again, your kids are already used to that platform. You aren't killing yourselves trying to spread yourself so thin saying, I've got to design a face-to-face lesson and I have to design a digital lesson. Because that's part of the challenge in these situations where schools are having to do both, is the teachers are saying, I don't have enough time to plan all of this and I don't know how to effectively do that. So instead, if you can plan it where it's a true hybrid blended environment. At our school, when they come to campus 2 days a week, that's what we do. We have live streamed lessons and our teachers plan a lesson that's a face-to-face instruction. They have it in their online platform. So some of our kids don't come to campus. Some of them stay at home and they log in virtually and they'll watch the live streamed of the kids here on campus, or they'll just go into their course and complete it. But regardless of which method they choose to do, that's their lesson for the day. And the teacher is the constant variable, regardless of what medium they're using to get their content.
Anyone else?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Amy, I'm going to step up here. And this is going to be a surprise to all my panelists because it's really a surprise to myself. Because for my home school district, I decided to run for the school board. And I'm now teaching in a different county. So it makes it easy enough. But I've put a lot of thought into the fact that in our area, we're off the beaten path. We're separated from we're a small community, 15,000 people. And based off our surveys, because we were going to do hybrid initially, and most of the residents are not happy with that. Obviously, the governor has told us we have to be online now. But it came down to about, from what I was able to see, is about 10% of our teachers don't feel safe going face-to-face. And approximately that same number of kids, families, don't want them face-to-face. So the way I had it worked out in my head was those teachers that don't want to go face-to-face, they can be our virtual, And those students that don't want to be face-to-face, they can be those students for that, because we do have an online learning academy as well associated with our district. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is, if we're not willing to adjust and be flexible, we're never going to solve the problems. So yeah, there are people that want it this way, there are people that want it that way. But as educators, we need to be, or we should be, flexible enough to give the families and the students what they need at that point, or what we even think they need at that point, to meet them where they are. As Nicole was talking about earlier, if we don't meet them where they're at, we've already lost them. So I think flexibility is the biggest issue, and understanding that, as Teresa brought up, not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. Not everybody has 30 minutes, as we talked about the last webinar, to sit in the parking lot on a bus while they're trying to download documents, right? We don't have that. But if we open our minds, listen to everybody's side, we'll find common ground. So it's able to be done without doubling the school's budget. Because, we can't, initially my thought was, well, we have to double the teachers. One's for online for all the kids, for their days they're not in campus, and the kids that are on campus, we can't have teachers teaching, twice as many classes at the same time. But there's always a will, there's always a way.
That's great. Really great insights. And I do want to share one of the things that I've seen a lot of in my role is there's a lot, this one's dated, right? This one's from April. But there's a lot of information out there. People are really great about sharing information. Here's the expectations my school put together for remote learning. Here's are some tips and tricks for hybrid learning. So schools and districts are publishing online what they're doing, and you can glean a lot, especially from if you try to find some alignment with a school or a teacher or a district that has similar attributes as yours, whether it's location, student population. So I would also encourage you to, when it comes to things like expectations and strategies, to look to see what's out there, because a lot of the districts are wanting that to be of use for people. The time just flies too fast when we're together. So keep the questions coming. We have time for some more questions. We have one in the Q&A from an educator perspective. What sorts of new technology do you need? Are you looking for to best instruct during times of remote learning? In other words, what would be most helpful, or what are you searching for to fill some of the existing technology gaps? So it sounds like we have someone, maybe that's a nonprofit that's looking to do a donors choose fund for everybody. Thank you for the great question. But yeah, from your perspective, what types of technologies are you looking at for the next generation?
I'm gonna answer a little bit, but kind of a no answer. Fortunately for my district, my school, technology is not an issue. Each student is going to get their own Chromebook. All the teachers have district issued laptops. So as far as like hardware like that, there's really not going to be an issue. I think the only thing that we can anticipate would be, again, going back to Wi-Fi, not having internet for some of the families. So if I could ask for anything, it would be maybe some mobile hotspots for the most needy families that we may have. That's the only thing that I can think of right now. Because other than that, the infrastructure, our IT, I mean, everything, our district's really stepping up to the plate, and they've been doing so for a while, for a couple of years now. So we don't really have that need. Maybe what does happen is maybe backup Chromebooks for the students, because they tend to break a lot and replacing them takes some time. So I think it's that, the internet access for some of our families, and then just having extra devices for when they do end up breaking, because they will break.
So Alejandro, I think we would all agree that those things are extremely important, and we're all short those items, and how do we replace them? I actually took the question a different way. The way I interpreted the question is, what is the next piece of technology to solve today's problems? So, I mean, Wi-Fi is always going to be a problem. A Chromebook is always going to be a problem. But what is out there? And I think that came from, I apologize, I don't remember who that came from, the question. But it's, what is the next step in technology that solves our issues today? Maybe Chromebooks come with hotspots built in. Maybe districts have to start paying for Wi-Fi's in the Chromebooks. I don't know. But there's got to be, there's going to be something. What is that something? And Nicole, earlier I saw you raise your hand, and I think it was about the previous question, but I would like to hear where you were going with whatever you raised your hand about. Is that okay?
I don't remember.
Awesome.
Now I'm thinking about technology, sorry.
I thought about accessibility. Like, that's my thing right now. So, like, of course, my district always loves, I mean, we're investing in more and more and more Chromebooks. Of course, we're partnering with internet providers to get the hotspots and all of those things to families. But the biggest thing that sticks out in my mind is accessibility, because accessibility is still like an afterthought in when many things are designed. And I don't mean like my school district, I mean within like even the platforms that we use to deliver content. I mean in the websites that many of us might use as instructional tech, like many accessibility features are still missing, or they're an afterthought. And so like, I think that's the next step. How do we make sure that it's not an afterthought? How do we make sure that our young people, and accessibility doesn't necessarily mean you have a disability either. I want to be clear, like, it doesn't mean you have an IEP or something of that nature, right? It also means making it so that I can understand the lesson, right? Wherever I am. So just thinking around that, and I had no clue what that looks like, but it's got to be something that's standard.
So going back, looking at the question, Tracy's saying it. I'm looking at the question, and yeah, I can see that interpretation. I guess for me would be maybe, I don't think it's not new technology that hasn't been invented or isn't available. I think it just might be new technology that maybe we're not too aware of, or we're just not too well informed about. But I think for me, one of the biggest obstacles that I had back in spring when we were doing this, the first time, the crisis teaching, was just the organization aspect of it. I know my son, he had 8 different classes, and to me as a teacher, everything made sense. It's like, okay, each teacher has all these assignments that they have to do for the students, but and it made sense to me. But my son would always end up missing something. He would miss an assignment here, or he would miss an assignment there. And I think as good as Google Classroom is, I think there's just some tweaking, some organizational tweaking that needs to be done. And then as far as the parent perspective, I had no clue whatsoever what he had to do on a daily basis or even on a weekly basis. I knew he had the classes, but I didn't know which assignments he had to turn in, when he had to turn them in. To me, it was kind of like, okay, I know the teachers have it, but it seems like maybe some of the students might be missing it. So I think it's just maybe the gap is just the user and the technology itself. I think there's a lot of new technology out there. I think there's a bunch of things that we're learning, a lot of new websites that we can start using, but we just need more communication about that technology and not being afraid to try it. Like Nicole was saying, and I know she's raising her hand right now. With me, I'm the flip side of it. I'm the type that likes to go try out new things. And yes, I fail a lot of the times. And most of the times, the new things that we're trying might not be applicable the first time that we try it. But then as time goes by, we start learning how to use it. And it's not fun to fail. It really isn't. But I think, especially when I was my first couple of years teaching, I wanted to ask people about the new technology, but there was a lot of people that just didn't want to try it. So for me, it was that having somebody that you can ask as a resource about new things that you haven't tried yet. That's probably the gap that I see. Nicole, you had your hand raised, I think.
Yes, Alejandro, I love that you try new things. That's awesome. I think we need people on both sides of the spectrum here, right? What I wanted to say is that, like, looking at it from an equity point of view, I think most districts, because last year was crisis at learning, now we're going into like real distance education that we're planning for, which is a whole different thing. When people talk about how distance education didn't work last year, in the news, it kind of offends me because I'm like, we weren't doing that. We were doing crisis education. You know, we didn't come back from spring break. I never went back to my classroom. It was pretty crazy and chaotic, you know, pandemic-like. But now we're going into real distance education. And I think most places are giving kids Chromebooks, and, you know, we're giving them some, in a lot of cases, like in my district, hotspots, and that's wonderful. But that we have to remember as teachers that that's not equity, because not everybody has a quiet place in their house. Not everybody is taught to get up an hour before school and have breakfast and be prepared. Not everybody has peace in their home. Sometimes I don't have peace in my home. I have 3 small kids still. You know what I mean? Like, I have to like figure out already, like, where am I going to put everybody in the house so everybody can be on a Zoom call and not disrupting one another. We give out Chromebooks, but we're not giving out desks. We're not giving out quiet places in an apartment that might be overcrowded, or a home with several families living together. It's more and more people losing their jobs. And then also, when we talk about those skills, kids that are doing education from home need to have more self-advocacy. They need to be better communicators. So I think that as teachers going into the school year, we have to be really cognizant of really preparing our students, not just with the technology, but also with sort of the additional skill set that it takes to be successful in distance education. Because, I mean, it's very possible that most of us will be in distance education at some form, whether we're starting in hybrid or not, as the school year goes on.
Really, really great point. And I will share a powerful visual that some of you may have seen as we field any last questions that folks have before the end of our webinar. So if you've seen this, great. If you haven't, I'd just like to share this with you because I found it to be extremely powerful in terms of visualizing what is equality, what is equity, and what does liberation look like. And we could, obviously the fence posts, the fence markers represent different obstacles that stand in the way. And so when we talk about equity, to Nicole's point, it means a lot of things. It means a lot of things. And, you know, people are being challenged with considering their internal biases of, oh, that area, they have a lot of money, you know, they have everything they need. So it works in a lot of different ways, right? It's really understanding that every student is different, the circumstances are different, and equity isn't a given. And so I'm looking forward to the day when the fence is down. And I feel like now that people have a better understanding of the constraints that have existed, that they will demand, people will continue to demand that for their children, for the future workforce, for their communities. And so I see a lot of partnership emerging from local communities and at the state level of wanting to support schools and kids and families. Final thoughts from our panelists or attendees. Attendees, you can type in. Panelists, any final thoughts you have as we wrap up? Love to hear from you.
There is a question, Amy, on the Q&A about, and it says, especially for those panelists who are current teachers, what is the most effective way your administrator can support your success and the success of your student during these unique times? I am an administrator, so I'll let the teachers on the panel answer it, but I do know that one thing that I have found myself trying to do a lot of to support my teachers, and it's been received well, and I'm hearing is just trying to take off what I can from my teachers. So like for instance, this week, pretty much the entire week, I have been making virtual orientations for them. So we use, we're using a program called Beyond, which if you haven't seen it yet, it's really cool. It's like these little avatars that look exactly like you. And then when you record the voice, the like mouth moves in sync with what you're saying. So it's a really cool program. And so we have a lot of supplemental programs across our district. And so pretty much all week I've been like creating these whole entire scenes with scripts and putting it all together. And then all the teachers have to do is come in and I have to record their voice and then I put it all together for them. So that's one less thing that they need to worry about because I need them focusing on being able to have their courses ready and being able to make calls and welcome their students and that kind of stuff. So anytime we can do things like that, I think it's very helpful because a lot of our teachers aren't going to tell us what they need and they're not going to ask for help. And especially if we're not seeing them every day, it's gonna be really hard to identify them, just like our students. If we can't see their eyes and see the the cry for help in their eyes, then it's hard for us. So even as administrators, I think anytime we can step up and say, hey, let me take this off your plate and let me do this for you, I think it's helpful. But I am not a teacher right now, so I'll let the teachers speak to that.
What was the name of that website, Christine?
It's called Beyond, so it's like a B, but it's
Y-O-N-D.
Yeah, it's very cool. I definitely recommend looking into it. It's super, super easy to use. And you can create all these little characters and avatars and you can save them. And then it's pretty easy, even if you're not very tech savvy, because I don't have a lot of those advanced skills.
Alejandro, you mind if I jump in real quick?
Go ahead.
So the question is from Doug. And Doug, for me, and I'm going to say a fair number of my colleagues, is trust. Trust your teachers enough to know that they know what their kids need. They know what their kids didn't receive at the end of last year. Give us the space. We have the education. Give us the space and the trust to do what we need to do for our kids. Thank you.
Well said. Alejandro?
For me, so this is my 7th year teaching. I've had 4 different principals in that time. In fact, I had 4 new principals 4 years straight in a row. So for me, it was always about building that relationship with them. And I think right now, with the current principal that I have, Dr. Reina, she's awesome. She really is. She's one of the best that I've had, if not the best that I've had so far. And I think it comes down to what Tracy said, the trust. You have to build that relationship with your admin first. Because even now, I mean, and I'm sure I've had friends of mine that are like 20 plus years veteran teachers. They get called into the principal's office and they're like, uh-oh, what did I do wrong? So building that relationship, I think is the best thing. Just knowing that, yeah, that they're an administrator, yes, they're the principal, but they know a little bit about your personal life. They care a little bit about it and they show it. I think that's going to go the extra mile, especially right now when social distancing really separates us from one another, but we have to stay together that way.
I would say support all social emotional learning goals. So similar to what Alejandro said, making sure that you're connecting with your staff as human beings, right? So Nicole said it earlier, it was so refreshing. And I had the same experience when I got assigned an advisory caseload remotely, which was much smaller than my normal advisory. And I was calling the same parent every week. Now, I don't like talking on the phone. I'll be very honest. I'm a texter, an emailer. I do not want to get on the phone. So I was dreading this. But that personal connection, those bonds, I've known these parents since August of the year before. But talking to them every week, we had like a routine. We set up a day. We could talk about anything. It didn't have to be about the work. And like that formed a connection that I teach 8th grade. My 8th graders are now moving to 9th grade. I'm still getting calls from parents, right? Still checking in. And so I think, that personal connection is very important. And the way we do that is by making space to talk about things other than work. And that's the same thing we have to do for our young people when we start these lessons. We have to make space to talk about things other than school. We have to know what's going on in their world. And as an administrator, you have to be willing to be flexible and push aside whatever curriculum, of course, do the curriculum, but like make space within that curriculum where we can do these check-ins with young people. And then also give me some money to pay for some things and to send little gifts in the mail, because I fundraised in the spring to send little small postcards and bracelets and that personal touch. Some of that had to be done electronically, but give me the money too. So.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen on Donors Choose, I've seen some of the things that teachers are raising money for, and it's disheartening that, teachers are raising money for cleaning supplies for their classroom and, different items that one would think would, be put in there for them. So yeah, I definitely agree. It takes a little bit for those morale boosters, and they go a long, long way. So you guys, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, your wisdom, your expertise. Thank you to all of our attendees who were here. This was a fantastic session. We will send you the recorded link. We'll make these links available as well to everybody. And next Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to have our students. We're going to have students who have had a lot of experience with blended and online learning come and talk about what the benefits and advantages and, the learning curve for them. They're going to talk about it to hopefully inspire and to really help us pave a path forward that's positive and replaces fear with excitement for this year. All right, you guys, thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. And panelists, I will be in touch with you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I got kicked off right at the end there.
No problem.
I did too. Thank